All right, first and foremost, I should probably go ahead and just get into TU Portal for a second, just to remind you that there is this countdown for getting your vaccination, right? In case you haven't done so already, that you need to have your Moderna vaccine, and you have to have it on September 1st, or Pfizer on September 10th, or your Johnson & Johnson by October 1st. So just a reminder that you need to, that's required for pretty much everybody, unless you have an exemption, in which case you would know about how to deal with that. So just keep that in mind. I would get it done sooner rather than later, the vaccine. First one, just, any vaccination will make your arm sore for the first one, so it's not really that bad. Second dose, I had Moderna, and it did give me some fever-like symptoms, but it wasn't like end of the world. Just, wasn't the most fun thing, but I mean, it beat getting COVID, so. Okay, so with Fox and Rabbit done, right? If you're still working on that, please let me know. Just note that you have 2 quizzes to complete on ArrayList. Now, first off, the big difference here with ArrayList is that we are going to be utilizing generics, which will probably be the huge focus of what you're doing. So if you haven't watched the videos yet, be sure to watch them. And when I say videos, remember that each of these is a playlist with multiple videos. These videos are all broken up into separate parts, separate digestible parts, so that you can have, a pretty easy time watching them. You can watch one, go and take a break, watch another one, rather than just trying to maintain your concentration for like an hour 20, which, as you know from experience, isn't the easiest thing when you've got a giant distraction machine in front of you. Okay, so my material will go over that very well. This week we're working on basically your standard exercises. Not necessarily the most fun things in the world, but they're necessary. They're the kind of things you would work on with arrays, pretty much. But instead we're going to be working on ArrayList with generics. Okay? Keep in mind that the answers you come up for this homework, they will be utilized in the next homework, because you'll be asked to analyze them in runtime analysis. That means, if you don't know what that means big O. And if you don't know what that means, you'll learn. Okay? I'm using list here, the list interface, because list is shorter and to type than ArrayList, but also it's easier to read. And I go into detail about here, as well as in our videos, about how to use how to write generic methods. That means the methods that take in generic parameters. And what does that mean? Well, in this case, what we're saying is that we've got this is a function that's to tell whether or not something is inside this list. Whether this item is inside this list. And what the E parameter specifies is 2 things. It's basically saying that all the variables, everything inside this list is the same type. But not only that, this item is the same type as all the things inside the list. Does that make sense? So it's basically forcing that these 2 things to match. Now, what is an E? That is defined basically at runtime. Basically, E is kind of a variable for a class type. It says, I don't know what kind of class we're going to use in here, but once you call it and run it, that's when I'll figure it out. So if you pass in a bunch of integers, if you pass in a list of integers, then this thing has to match. If you pass in a list of strings, then this thing has to match. There are further restrictions you can put on it, like you can say that E is only going to be things that are comparable to each other. Or E is only a type of thing that can be considered a number. Or so on. Or E is only a member of this subclass. But those kind of things are not necessary for this problem. Although some of you may try that for the permutation, for the permutations. Now this is only for the type where you don't. Now you use this when you are writing a static method, right? See, all these methods are going to be static method in this exercise. And you use this only when we are unsure of what the type is going to be, but we know there are some restrictions, such as matching, right? Furthermore, we don't really need to use generics at all when we do public static return type my method list of integers. Right? If we know that we're taking a list of integers, we just write list of integers. Okay? And notice that we don't put a generic thing over here. That is like one of the more common mistakes that I can see from students, which is, I don't need to IntelliJ to write this. I'll just put it in Notepad and bump up the font size. Font. Okay. Okay, and I'll see something like this. Public static integer integer. So this is like for the second method, which is, let's see, that is finding all the multiples. List integer list int x, right? And that's to write something that has all the integers of x in it. However, this is incorrect, but your compiler won't complain about it because it's syntactically correct. What's going to happen in this case is that if you try to deal with anything that are like any functions that are related to numbers, you'll get into issues when you try to match int x with anything inside of here. It says you can't convert a type integer to an int, which is precisely the opposite of what is going on. Except that if you are working in an IDE, you'll notice that the color of integer will change as soon as you put an integer right over here. Now, that's because when you do this, you are specifying what the name of the generic type is. So it no longer considers integer a class. It considers integer in this context the generic type, meaning integer is the magic word I use for when I don't know what's going to go in there. So don't put that in. So don't put this in here. The only thing you ever want to put inside those less than greater than signs by your return type is like a letter like E. Sometimes we'll see E for element, T for type. Sometimes we'll see multiples like key and value. Yes?
I always thought everything before the brackets was the return type.
This over here is the return type. But there's a lot of stuff that is optional in Java. For instance, if we leave out public, that defaults to what's called default visibility, which is package visibility. So you can leave out public. Likewise, if you're not using a generic type, you can leave that out. And it goes in between the static and the return type. But it's typically like just a letter. Yes?
But how would it interfere with the input then? If I put it.
If you put that in here, it's not necessarily going to interfere with it in the sense that it'll let you put it in. But once you get into the method, it's going to be like integer is the generic type, and the generic type this time around is integer. But when I'm writing the method, I have no idea that the things I'm actually writing and using are actually integers. So when you try to like assign, like when you try to do something like this, like list dot get 0 mod x, right, to check if they're divisible. Any kind of thing that you do over here will come with an error because you're going to say that an object can't be modded by an x because it thinks that integer is a generic type, not actually an integer class. This is basically overriding temporarily what integer is. So all I'm saying is basically only use this for ease, and only if you need to use ease. If you know exactly what it is, just write it, which is what you're going to be doing for problems 2 and 3. Okay. So speaking of our problems, let's go ahead and go over them, and then I'll let you get to work. Okay, first problem is uniqueness, which basically says, hey, here's a list of stuff. Please check if all the items in the list are unique. So in other words, making sure that none of them are the same. You can use, and by the same, using the equals method. That's how I would know if they were the same, okay? Next, all multiples. Given a list of integers and an int, give me a list of all, return a new list that has all the integers that are multiples of that second number. So if our input is this, and we give 5, then we're going to get 25, 5, 30, 25. We don't have to check for duplicates or anything, right? Or rather, we don't have to account for the fact that there's duplicates. See over here, right? We've just moved out all the duplicates. Now, 2.3 is going to be pretty much the same thing, except you're working with strings and certain and strings of certain sizes. So I like to eat apples and banana. We'll give you eat and, because that's all the 3-letter words. Is permutation is definitely the hardest, while 2.6 will be the trickiest. Difference is there, right? Because trying to solve this one is a pain in the rear. Okay? And I will go over it on Thursday. Okay? If you can't solve it. But I want you to try to take a crack at it, because lots of students come up with very unique ways of trying to get this one. The answer is, if you're trying to solve it without looking anything up, it's going to be a mess, and that's perfectly okay. That's how I expect you to do it. If you try solving this one while looking this up, you're going to be dealing with new data structures that you've probably not had any experience with, or you're going to be dealing with comparable types, and you're going to be having a mess of that. Either way, feel free to ask me for help on that one, because, again, I'm not going to pretend that Stack Overflow doesn't exist, But try to solve it. Try your best to solve this one. So you're given 2 list objects, and I want to know if they're permutations of each other. So permutations means that they have the same items in the same order. All right. There's essentially 2 ways to go about solving that. Okay. One is to manually go through and make sure that the counts of each item in there match. Right. So making sure that basically, so here 1, 2, 4 and 2, 1, 4 are permutations of each other. So making sure that there's 1, 1, 1, 2, and 1, 4. If it was 1, 2, 2, 4, right, and the other one was 2, 2, 1, 4, or 2, 1, 2, 4, we'd just be making sure that there were 2 2s instead. Okay? So basically count, for each item, count how many times it appears in the first list, how many times it appears in the second list. Right? One thing to help you with this one and reduce the amount of logical checks is that for them to be permutations, they have to be the same size. It's impossible for them to be permutations if not. You can easily prove that by contradiction, I believe. I mean, it's like one of those definition things, but like you can prove it, which is nice. The other way to do it is that 2 things are permutations of each other if you sort them, and they end up being the same thing. So you think, okay, I'll just toss this into collections.sort. By the way, that's a method that exists, collections.sort. And you're going to try that, and you're going to bang your head wondering why it's not going to work, because it's going to mention something about, it's going to mutter something about comparables and comparators, and you're going to be going, what? Again, I'll be happy to go over that one with you. So, 25, string to list of words. So extra credit opportunity, and if you've done the previous extra credit, this builds on that. So write a method called a string to list of words, takes in a string, converts it into a list of words, right? So here is a string input, give me a list of words, and you can just assume that we don't have to worry about punctuation. Instead, what we're dealing with is white space. And you'll want to use the split method there to help you with that one. Split, though, takes in a regular expression. So if you've learned about regular expressions, then you can easily understand what this one is, or what I'm saying over here, that this matches any amount of white space. Okay? Now, for full credit, all right, so here's hello world, then it should be hello, comma, world. For extra credit, I want you to also sanitize it. which means removing all that excess punctuation that you don't have to care about when you're doing it the normal way. Because that's a pain. And if you do that, I want to reward you for it. Okay? Finally, the trickiest one, which is remove all instances. Given a list and an item, which are going to be the same type, the method then proceeds to remove each item in the list that matches the given item. So this, important, should not return. It should return nothing since it changes the list that was provided. So again, you're not returning a new list. This will be a void method. You're affecting the original list. Okay? And it's also very important that if you pass in, now even though my examples here are using integers, it should work on any type. Okay? Now it's important that you test it on my example, which is 1, 4, 5, 6, 5, 5, 2, and then trying to remove all 5s. You should get, with all the 5 removes. However, you may end up in a state where you have 1 5 left over. In which case you'll find out why this is one I consider the trickiest one. There are 3 common solutions that students have to this one. And then there's some other solutions 4 common solutions that people have to this one. And then there's then at least one student each semester comes up with something rather wild. So I'm always excited to see what people come up with. All those solutions have their own advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so here is the point breakdown. Every method working properly is 15 points. So if you can't do one for some reason, well, first ask me because I want to fix that. But it's 15 points. So 5 points of each is making sure you use the generics correctly. 10 points for making sure your code is neat and properly indented, because at this point in your programming career, I guess, you should make sure that things are neat and no longer complete disorganized bunch of spaghetti. And especially if you're working in an IDE or editor, there should be some functions built in to auto-indent your code and clean it up if you make a mistake. I highly recommend learning the keyboard shortcuts for that. Makes your life easier. I knew the keyboard shortcut for Eclipse, which is Control-A, Control-I. I think it's like Control-Alt-L in IntelliJ, or Control-Shift-L. I can't remember. But you'll want to look that up. To demo it, you'll be doing remove all instances, and then you're gonna show me that works on the test case. So be sure to explain that, plus one other method that we'll choose at random. And I'll just simply glance at the others because they're fairly easy to check to see if they're correct. Okay. Any questions before I let you get to it? All right. I'll stop the recording.